Hi, welcome to Archaeonomy. Today I'll be talking about archaeological news and articles from the beginning of March 2018. Today we'll start with an article from phys.org, What Vikings Really Put in Their Pillows. Okay, I have to admit, when I saw this I could not escape the mental image of a Viking pillow fight. And the thought of what a Viking raider would put in their pillow. Alright, on with the story. Your pillows, if they're not synthetic, almost certainly filled with domestic goose or duck feathers. These are the most common types of fill used for this purpose today, but our ancestors weren't always as discerning. Eagle owls, says Jorgen Rosvold, a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Archaeology and Cultural History at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, NTNU University Museum. Rosvold is among a handful of individuals in Norway who can identify birds based solely on their feathers. He examined a pillow from a Viking grave and found feathers from Europe's largest owl in it, along with feather residues from a variety of other species. Rosvold is part of an NTNU Down project, Dunprosjektek, where one of the goals is to develop methods to identify small bits of feather residue. It's not always easy to tell what species a feather comes from, especially if only small fragments of feathers remain. Minuscule barbules, the smallest branch of a feather, are examined under a microscope to identify the kind of bird. Here are two different birds. At bottom left is a rock ptarmigan, a type of game bird with rings around its barbules. At the bottom right is a mallard with triangular growths at the end of its barbules. Here we have a tiny feather fragment from a Viking-era grave. It was identified as coming from a crow. Rosvold goes on, in some cases, if we're unable to identify a feather beyond the family level with microscopes, we can make more headway using DNA analysis. The analyses are easier when we've narrowed down a range of possible birds, says Rosvold. But this is clearly an art for specialists. Conservator Lena Oliki-Airola at the NTNU University Museum is skilled at detecting the impression of feathers in metal, amongst other things. This can happen when a sword is laid on a feather pillow in a Viking grave, for example. Over the years, the sword corrodes and the feathers in the pillow become covered with the rusty metal. So maybe I wasn't so far from the mark when I put my Dane axe in that pillow then. For a long time, people simply took what they had available to stuff their pillows. The researchers have found feather samples that date back as far as the late Germanic Iron or Merovingian age, from around 570 through the Viking era. No earlier use of feathers in Norway has been discovered. That doesn't mean it didn't take place. The Romans used a lot of feathers in their pillows, for example. This seems like a pretty obvious conclusion and none too groundbreaking, but I find this article more interesting for the science used to get to the conclusion and the result itself. Being able to determine the species of bird from 1,000-year-old or older remains by examining the feathers microscopically, like one with a fingerprint? That's pretty neat. Next we travel south to Rome, with this article from Answer entitled Rome Metro Work Uncovers House of Commander. Rome, March 2nd. Work on a new Roma subway station has uncovered an ancient Roman commander's house, the first discovery of its kind in the Italian capital, archaeologists said Friday. The dig on the metro sea line has turned up a domus connected to the dormitory of a barracks built at the time of Emperor Trajan, and then modified by Hadrian. A domus is a type of house, a reasonably posh one, and the name via the Latin derivation domesticus leads to our English word domestic. The dormitory and barracks were discovered at the Amba Aradam Stopworks site in 2016. It's an exceptional discovery because a barracks has never been identified before in Rome, nor a domus connected to the barracks, said Rome's archaeological superintendent Rosello Rea. The domus of the commander was found about 12 metres under the level of the Amba Aradam station, near the Basilica of San Giovanni Laterano, St. John Lateran. The house will now be dismantled level by level and temporarily moved to another site before being placed back at its original site, sources said. In this picture you can see the shaft leading down to the discovery. Bloody hell, that brings back memories of digging out wells. Good times. Good times. The area at and around the Amba Aradam station has already yielded a rich archaeological trove, I assume. Last June, excavations conducted as part of work for the new sea line of the Rome Metro uncovered Pompeii-like finds, including a dog skeleton. The diggers unearthed two spaces dating to the middle of the imperial period, which, due to a fire, feature well-conserved parts of a wooden ceiling and furniture. The material is only conserved in exceptional environmental and climatic conditions, or after special events like those who took place at Herculaneum and Pompeii, said sources at Rome's Special Superintendency. I'm sure my regular subscribers are familiar with these conditions that conserve organics like wood, but for anyone else, first of all, welcome! Anyway, organics can be preserved in extremely dry conditions such as deserts or when completely frozen in glaciers or permafrost, or in wet conditions where there's no way for air to get into the material, which we call anaerobic preservation, that occurs underwater and in bogs, for example. In this case, the timber sounds like it was preserved because it was charred into charcoal. The ongoing excavation is taking place on the southern slopes of the Celian Hill, one of Rome's 7 hills, which in imperial times was home to luxury aristocratic residences, and further to the south a series of military buildings, including a barracks recently found in Via Eponio. The stretch of metro from Amber Aradam to the Imperial Fora is scheduled to be unveiled in 2021. From one great city of the ancient world to another. In this article from Ashaq al-Awsat, titled Rain in Iraq Ends Drought Uncovers Historic Ruins. The heavy rains that hit Iraq over the past 2 weeks have not only put an end to the dry season, which has almost dried up the historic Tigris River, but also helped uncover hundreds of historical ruins that were washed away in Babylon, one of the country's most important archaeological sites. Hussein Flay, Babylon's Director of Antiquities, said in a press statement, "Among the findings were pottery utensils, coins and metal pieces. The discoveries will be examined to determine the exact historical period that dates back to," he added, suggesting that they belong to the Parthian and Islamic eras. I admit I don't know much about the Parthians, except that they were the archenemies of Rome, and they had a sneaky tactic with their horse archers of feigning retreat and shooting backwards behind them at the force that hopefully had broken formation to pursue them. It was called the Parthian shot. Last year, 1,000 pieces were discovered this way, which proves that the ruins may be close to the surface and not always buried deep in the ground, Flay said. Such discoveries after heavy rainfall are not rare in Iraq. I don't think discoveries of this sort are rare anywhere. Storms here in New Zealand regularly expose coastal middens, Maori burials in dunes and shipwrecks in the intertidal zone. Stow that one away for later. Even on archaeological digs, when not all the spoil is being sieved, heavy rain will wash down the spoil heaps and expose artefacts in the spoil that were missed by the excavators, especially so if the spoil was removed using a 20-ton digger, which are not the most delicate of tools. Okay, from Iraq to America, starting with North Carolina. Another Phys.org article, this time entitled Archaeologist Uncovers Hidden History of Conquistadors in American South. Chris Rodning, the Paul and Deborah Gibbons Professor in the Tulane School of Liberal Arts Department of Anthropology, unravels early entanglements between Native Americans and European explorers, revealing how their interactions shaped the history of the American South. Native Americans' response to Spanish explorers and colonists form an important part of the story behind the history of European colonialism in North America, says Rodning, who conducts archaeological research at Fort San Juan, the earliest known permanent European settlement in the interior United States, located near Morganton, North Carolina. Archaeologists have really taken to the use of drone photography. Nice for those who can afford it, I suppose. Peter didn't use a photo when the surface was clean. This looks like a bit of a mess. I can see an alignment of post holes, those pale dots in the dark brown, and what may be an infilled defensive ditch on the right side. Those projections and chamfers on the corner of the excavation square balks are interesting. I've never seen that technique used before. There are horizontal lines running across the site. I assume they're the remnants of test trenches and they've had their balks knocked out to create the excavation squares. This photo frustrates me. I need more information. In 2013, we identified the archaeological footprint of the fort, said Rodning, noting that the teams had since focused on learning how the structure was built and where it was located in relation to nearby Native American settlement called Joara. In 1540, the Conquistador Hernando de Soto traversed this part of western North Carolina. He threatened communities with violence, demanded food, and sometimes attacked when they did not comply with his demands. He also pressed Native Americans into service as porters to carry supplies for his men, said Rodning. And here we have the mainstay of archaeology, child labour. I mean educating the youth? One generation after De Soto's expedition, Spanish explorer Juan Pardo arrived with another group of soldiers and established Fort San Juan in 1566. When Pardo marched inland, the town of Joara was a much more powerful town than it had been 26 years previously, said Rodning, possibly because of Joara's previous interactions with De Soto. At first an alliance formed between Pardo and the people of Joara, but in 1568 warriors from Joara sacked the fort and burned the compound. Architectural materials and designs of burned houses at the site demonstrate evidence of the typical Native American style of architectural design and construction, but some wooden fragments also indicate they were cut and shaped with metal tools. The significance of that is Native Americans didn't have those types of metal tools, said Rodney. The University Press of Florida published the group's findings in a 2016 book called Fort San Juan and the Limits of Empire, Colonialism and Household Practice at the Berry Site. This type of archaeology is quite familiar to me, as a site like this would be very much like working on a British redoubt here in New Zealand. Finding archaeological remains of the Conquistador's expeditions is awesome. I wonder if there's any plans to reconstruct the fort. Finally, we have an article from Fox News. Yes, I kid you not, it's only fair. I've looked at articles from CNN and the BBC, so I guess it's Fox's turn. And we're off to Maine, a state I'm quite fond of, having lived there for a year. Nor'easter uncovers wreck of Revolutionary War-era ship on Maine beach. A shipwreck believed to be more than 160 years old resurfaced on a Maine beach Monday morning after a nor'easter ravaged the east coast over the weekend and washed away enough sand for a glimpse of the historic structure. See, what did I say before about storms and shipwrecks? The skeletal structure of the Revolutionary War-era boat appeared on Short Sands Beach in York early Monday. York Police Department posted photos of the shipwreck on its Facebook page. The shipwreck has previously appeared after a major storm passes through the area, dragged away enough sand to unveil the buried treasure. The structure appeared in 2007 after the winter storm Nemo in 2013, according to Seacoast Online. The vessel was also seen in the 1950s. I've worked on intertidal sites like this in the past. They can be a huge pain to work on, but very interesting. You have to work with the tides and are always battling with the sea infilling the areas you're trying to excavate. Still, you can find some things that survive due to anaerobic preservation, ideally artefacts that help identify the vessel in question. That's it for this week. Hope you're enjoying this new format of videos from me. I have noticed the views going down a bit. Please give me some feedback on how I can improve. Do you like the roundups, or should I go back to my more New Zealand-centric research scripted videos, which I couldn't do that often? Would you like me to do something else entirely? It'd be great to get some feedback from you. Thanks for watching. Cheers!